All right, thank you for joining us on AM Live. If you've just joined us, we're looking at this. Okay, they've taken off the document behind me, but Code of Conduct and Governance for Churches in Kenya. And with me in studio, we've been joined by Jo Mdivo. She is the Executive Director today in her capacity as Executive Director, Center for Law and Justice. Good to have you in studio. I kept saying she's joining us virtually, but she is here in person, which is even better. We also have in studio Bernice Gashegu, and she is former Registrar General, Office of the AG. To be honest, I had to Google that one. Yeah, but I saw it has had to do with marriages and societies, etc. And also, you've already been introduced to her. She was explaining to us what prompted this document, and she is Reverend Jacqueline Othoro, and she is Head of Education, RWAC Assembly. Good to have all three of you ladies in studio this morning. But I'll come to you now, Bernice. When did this journey to now have this document that we are launching, that is being launched tomorrow at the All Saints? I keep saying that, between 9 and 12 for those who would like to witness that. Where did this journey begin?
Thank you for that question. Well, the journey began at Safari Park, where the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries Kenya and Hesabika Trust co-sponsored a governance meeting, and it was on corporate governance, and it involved all Kenyans, professionals and other people. But they did have a session for church leaders. And during that conference, one of our judges was a speaker, and he said, the biggest challenge to corporate governance is the churches. And he went on to explain in what circumstances and how. And at the end of that conference, the church leaders went to Joshua Wathanga, who was heading Hesabika, and said, we need help. Would you help us? And so Joshua formed this committee from various, we were accountants, lawyers, to work on this document. However, from a government perspective, because I was Registrar of Societies for many years, there were many, many challenges with the churches and terrible headlines, just implying that the churches, are just doing business, they're not accountable to their members. And even in my office, we had many church members coming to complain. They're not holding annual general meetings. The chairman wants to be the chairman forever and ever. We had elections, but chair has refused to exit. So this is not a new problem on corporate governance. And from a government perspective, government tried to see, how do you streamline the churches? And I can also add, having been registrar, do you know there's a time that under the Societies Act, I was registrar of political parties. And when we came up with the political parties bill and the act, that streamlined the political parties. You don't hear about them. Mm-hmm. There's a time football clubs, Gor Mahia, AFC were registered under the Societies Act, and there was all manner of problems. And then we came up with the Sports Act, and that has streamlined. So the churches, the history has been there, the concern has been there. And so it's just really wonderful that Hesabika stepped forward, and here were the churches saying, we need help. And got this team to work on a code, which we're discussing today.
All right, so this is really about corporate governance.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
Joy, the document is being launched at a time when we're having this conversation around self-regulation of churches, or does the government need to step in? And a task force was set up, of course, following the events of Shakahola, tragic as they are. But what is the remit of this code of conduct?
Thanks, Oliver, and I'm glad to be here. One of the things that Bernice has said, if you listen to her very carefully, was that as long as the structure to organize churches is still under the Societies Act, what we're encountering in the churches will carry on happening, because the threshold for registering a society is just have 10 people who think that they think alike and are happy to belong, and that is a society. It's like bare minimum. So when it comes to religious bodies, of course, a few regulations have been passed to try and show, okay, one of them must have a certificate in some training in a religious institution or something like that. So there has been a bit of patchwork here and there to try and buttress, but the provisions of the Societies Act are inadequate to help churches to self-regulate, even if we wanted to. But at the same time, the reality is, because of the unique nature of religion, the very subjective nature of religion, belief, conscience, it is impossible for government to decide, you know what, we're going to have a one-size-fits-all threshold for everybody. The only place government can do something for everybody is like in marriages, register them. But who you marry, where you marry, the style you marry, whether you will do a brief thing or a 7-day event, that's up to you. But at the end of the day, the government must register you. So even with the process of the task force, one of the things that we hope we're going to achieve is that we will have an act specifically dealing with religious institutions, and now not just churches. Every single religious institution should be removed from the Registrar of Societies and have its own set of registration procedures. But under that set of registration procedures, then there has to be the allowance of how each religion is going to govern itself. And that's where a tool like the Code of Conduct comes in. So you need to look at it more as it is an assistive tool rather than it is a prescriptive tool. So it is one of those tools that exist if you want to improve yourself. So right now, even in the absence of an enabling statute, even in the absence of anything changing, a church can look at the Code of Conduct and opt to become a signatory. And in signing the code, they as an institution opt to take it on and operate by those guidelines. So it's a bit like ISO certification. So if you ask the church, how do you guys govern yourselves? And they say, you know, we are using the Sabika Code of Conduct. And me on the other side, being familiar with the conduct, I can say, oh, that's what you're using. So I know what to expect in terms of the organizational structure of the church. So right now, it is at a place where it is an optional tool to assist the churches. But the ideal situation would be for us to have a legal framework where tools such as this, it's by no means an exclusive tool, but a tool such as this can also find a place that it can become more weighty. But as it is right now, even as we launch it tomorrow, most of the churches who are signing on are doing so because, as Bernice said, they saw the need for some expertise, some assistance to help them. Because if all you know is thus says the Lord, you really might not know how to write a good board charter for your elders or something like that. But we as Christian professionals have assisted them to tell them, look, we belong to the church, we believe in you and what you're doing. And here, this is what works in the corporate world, and we think we've given it a lens that can work in the church as well.
Okay, so like you said, like Bernice, you talked about professionals being involved in this process, including professionals in the law, such as Joy and yourself, as well as accountants, and you mentioned, did you say public secretaries?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and it was interesting because Dan Wangi, on a light note, was telling me these are not the, these are, when you say secretary, please be clear what you're saying. But Reverend, who at this point is adopting this document?
Well, I can't tell you precisely who. I can tell you what we hope will adopt it. We are hoping that the church body in Kenya will adopt it. The church body is divided into different organizations that have different churches underneath it, from the mainline churches to that NCCK, is an umbrella body. You have the EAK that has many of the Pentecostal churches in it. We're saying the church in Kenya, the body of Christ, if you come and you organize yourself in a particular manner, then we're saying this is an available tool for you to use. As is rightly said, when we go to theological school, we study the Bible and we study how to shepherd the sheep. We don't study how to do, very few places can you study administrative skills and how to manage and run a church. And we come out of theological school and there you are. You've got an organization that is very complex to actually run and manage, because you've got various entities. You've got the leaders of the church, the pastors, the bishops who are leading the church. You've got the congregation, And then you've got those ones who are administrative in their tasks for the church. And so by the time you're putting it all together, it's a very complex, unit. And the best way that, when Hasabika came together is to say, how best can we, within the confines of what Scripture tells us, that a church is a body, it's an organism, it's living. Within those confines, how then can we put some structure to it? Because you can imagine, if you have a body that is the cells, the kidney, the liver, but you don't have the skeleton, you got just a mass of cells and flesh. But the skeleton gives it the structure that it needs to move, to function, to sit, to lie down, to run, to walk. And part of what we're saying with this, kind of governance situation is that we want to help churches, particularly for me, those ones who don't even have the basics. A man of God, a woman of God has heard the call and has gone forth. And then they find the church is growing. It gets to 200 people and they begin to realize, I need some form of structure. And so this is an easy way for someone to come and take a document that's been thoroughly looked over for every aspect of you leading in a church, including how to onboard your leaders, how to have a trustee board, how to have, your deacons, your elders. And these are all church terms, the deacons and the elders, you find it in Scripture. But what does it look like for the 21st century? So this document, I believe, is, even for those of us who may have quite solid structures in our church, it's actually a refresher. You can go back and look at it and say, okay, we've got this, but we've missed this. And, and it's given you the framework to say, let's relook at what we have internally and see what we can do to enhance our governance and then our code of ethics. Because I think that's where actually the bigger issue would be. What kind of code of ethics are in place concerning the leaders of a church vis-a-vis the congregation they serve and the world that they're in? And if we can have a good framework for that, then we're almost, I'm hesitant to use the word, but it's the only word I can think of using. We almost standardize what you'd expect if you went to my church. We all go to 3 different churches. If you're in my church, you're in her church, then you'll get the same kind of ethics from her pastor and from her pastor, because there's a standard built on Scripture that we're following.
All right. And why I asked who is because I imagine there are churches which have been established in this country for
hundreds of years.
Yes. So in my thinking, they really have established structures on how to address some of these things. So are you targeting the independents?
We're not targeting anyone in particular, but you are right. There are churches that have such strong internal government, really. And, I could mention the Catholic Church, the Anglicans, the Presbyterian. They have very strong internal government that has always existed. But without sounding like I'm biased, the Pentecostal charismatic, which are more recent churches, have a founder, who's Kenyan, that's where the challenge has been. And they know it, because if this morning I were to say to you, I am a bishop of the Catholic Church, I am not. But if I told you I'm a bishop of some church, on what basis would you argue with me? So they do, the independent charismatic churches are well aware of the challenge they face. And as I mentioned in that conference, they did say to Hesabika, please help us. And as you know, with recent developments in our country, this has really set a perfect stage for this code, because suddenly all these independent Pentecostal churches have said, we need to do something. If we don't do something, government may come in and begin to regulate us. So do we have anything? And I'm aware that this code was presented to the task force. So it's a document whose time has come because of recent developments in our country. These independent, charismatic churches are saying, we don't want to be regulated by government. We want to self-regulate. Do we have anything? And so as much as the code wasn't initiated because of the problem has come and found the code, and therefore many of these have said, yes, we need a document. And like Joy said, it's to supplement. If you register your church under the Societies Act, by law, you have a constitution. Every church has a constitution. And the Societies Act provides a model which the registrar would give to every church that was registered. So this comes to supplement your existing constitution. And even as you adopt, there are options. You could adopt it in its entirety or not so, you know. So there's a lot of flexibility. So really, it's supplementing your already existing constitution. And yes, that group of churches is the one most likely to adopt. But like Jacqueline said, others may say, well, this is a standard. For the first time we have a standard, I could check, does our constitution rise to the standard? Yes.
All right. Joy, I know you were very careful to say that this is prescriptive, no, assistive rather than prescriptive. So I sign on, and do you then trust, you take my word for it, that I will abide by this code of conduct?
That is primarily the premise, that if you are agreeing to sign on, then you also agree to a collegiality with your other peers who have signed on, that if something does happen, then they can sit down with you and ask you, we have this code that we are going by. By what, why are we where we are with you right now? Why I'm saying that is because, like Ms. Bernice says, the problem is sort of finding the code in existence. But if you dial back a little bit, a few decades ago, my daughter the other day told me, how did you guys used to do things back in the 20th century? So back in the 20th century, we had a constitution. And under Section 78 of the repealed constitution, there was actually a specific, I think it is subsection 5 of Section 78 of the repealed constitution, that said churches and religious institutions were not protected when they were violating matters of defense, public order, public health. And so things like we're seeing with the Kanyaris and the Shakaholas in the previous constitution was expressly outlawed. So dealing with them, we found that the government under Moi and not Kibaki so much, but Kenyatta, they used to clamp down very hard on rogue churches, which is why even the EAK broke away from the NCCK, because you had to toe very firm line. But once we had the new constitution, and we have Article 32 now, which quite frankly is, you know, so elastic, it's not fit for purpose, and it's something that we have to have a discussion about, because it just gives, you know, you can worship, you cannot discriminate on religion, and leaves the rest, it leaves everything else out. And so you find religious institutions were able to mushroom, and it's constitutionally protected to exist. But now if you sign on, and others have signed on, hopefully, and we have a law that says you can form an umbrella body, or you can form a college of people who are peers, who believe the same, who understand each other, who can police each other. Then that council can sit you down and tell you, brother, all of us have signed this code. We all understand what it says. Why are you doing what you're doing? And then if somebody chooses not to sign this code or any other code, they're not in the Catholic Church, they're not using anything, then the registrar of societies or the registrar of religious institutions can deal with that one directly, because you cannot say that you've got people who are helping you to oversight your organization. So this is a tool that's supposed to help people who agree to come together and have the same standard. That way we can peer, you know, there can be peer review mechanisms. So if I step out of line, my peers can bring me back and tell me, look, this is the standard. These are the consequences. This is how we deal with it. Tell your elders this, tell your elders that, or step out of line like this. Because I'll give you an example. Kanyari 1, forget about even what is going on now, but the very first time with the needles and the Vaseline and everything, the Evangelical Alliance leaders called him and asked him, Bana, what is this you're doing? And he told them to their faces, you people are preaching the gospel, I am in business. So we're not doing the same thing. Do I belong to EAK? No. Do I pay you anything? No. Am I in your registers? No. So on what basis have you called me? And with that, he left the meeting and it ended there. So you find, because there was no collegiality, the EAK had no moral authority to sort of discipline him. But now if it is somebody who's registered under the EAK, and let's say the EAK as an umbrella body has recommended the code of conduct as our standard, So as Ms. Bernice says, you can take and remove what really doesn't work, but this is basically where we are standing. If one of our pastors is found to be in a Kanyari-like situation, then the authority exists to say, look, we already have the Bible and we also have this. Why are you doing this? And if you cannot explain yourself satisfactorily, then there can be steps that are taken to help you remedy the situation. So that is the framework within which we are seeing this to exist. So the law has changed, it has mutated through the years. We have a situation where, actually, I was telling somebody, religious institutions now we're operating in inertia. We just have what we had before that we're moving in. But if somebody strictly looked at the laws that we have now, they're actually inadequate. Anything and everything can go. But right now, because there's some sort of, adabu kidogo, we are seeing where we are. But if you look at where religion has gone in other places in the world, you can come to a place where I open a church of joy, bow down and worship me. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, you know what? It's constitutionally protected. Our religious freedom, joy is a religion. And so we need to start sort of set differences and set a standard. And it's not just for churches, to be honest. Because this code of conduct is the sort of thing where if Muslim institutions want to adopt it, because it deals with governance, it's not Bible teaching or anything. It can be adopted by any religious institution because it's nuanced to protecting religious freedom and belief, but promoting good governance. So it's, like I say, it's a very adaptable tool, professionally done, with a slant to help religious persons, with all our quirks and differences, find a common ground, a level ground, as Reverend Jackie has said.
All right. Reverend, is this also intended to protect the flock, as it were, that they can have access to this document and be aware of whichever belief they choose to practice, that this is the standard that has been set, and if there are certain activities that go contrary to this, then they can ask questions.
I think so. Just to borrow from what Joy has said, if I open a church called the Church of Jackie, and I just start off with nothing and draw in a few people, but if my intent is to truly lead the flock of Jesus Christ, then I would be looking for where I can find the help to manage, to govern, to grow the church. So obviously there's the biblical theological help I'll be looking for. Either I'll go get trained or I'll partner with a more seasoned pastor to help me along the way. But when it comes to how do I run the church, then I have to figure out, how does this happen? What are the parameters I'm looking at? So that if, every Sunday we collect offering, we collect tithes. How can I be a good steward of the money that people entrust to me? Can they come and check? Is there a mechanism for them to come and say, okay, we gave this amount. What has it gone to? Have I gone on holiday to the Maldives with the money that has come in? Or am I truly doing the work that I've been called to do? So if I as a church say, you know what, I need the help, and I adopt, whether it's in entirety or in its portions, this code of conduct, then it actually behooves me to let my congregation know that there's a standard that we are following, And if I'm an open person and I've come in with the right intention, I've been called to the ministry, I've got nothing to hide. It actually works to my benefit to begin to grow the people around me in my church who understand some of the parameters. It protects them, it protects me. If I'm the kind of person who collects the offering, and we've seen it happen, where after it's all collected, I put it in my car and it goes in the glove box. And that becomes my ATM. I use it as I have need for. There's no place where it was registered or put in. There's no bank account. There's no, M-Pesa pay bill number. It just gets cash collected and everything is attached to me. I put myself in danger, obviously, as a person, because that is a recipe for embezzlement and fraud. But also it helps the congregation know and ask the questions. Who are these accounts attached to? Where's the money going? Who's doing an audit? Many big churches in this city have auditors, and they have once a year auditors come in. My own church is audited, once a year, and they come in and they check and they look at our numbers. How do we spend our money? So this would help someone who's starting out, who doesn't know the intricacies of governance, to have even the basics of saying, how do I account for the money that is given to me? It also helps in other areas, values, one of the biggest areas that we see problems in churches is the areas of finances, but also the areas of sexual misconduct. So again, this same document puts into place areas where we can understand this is sexual harassment. You don't talk to a woman this way. You don't handle a man this way. You don't handle a child in a particular way. You know, some of the things that we're already doing in our churches, we're saying on Sunday we take pictures, videos, photography, and we're saying we don't take pictures of children, you know, front face and put it on our social media platforms. We don't do that. We even tell the adults, if you don't want your photographs taken in church, this is the segment where you can sit, it's a dead space for photography, and you can come into church and you can worship without having your face appear on your church's social media. So there are things that this will help, you know, govern and manage how we interact in church. I would say any church that is starting out, they need to begin by having, you know, a document like this that really helps you put in place. And the reason why I would advocate it is because we know who has sat down and written it. I mean, there's a list, and they will share much better because they were on the committee. But trusted Christian leaders in this country have sat down and worked on this document. And we know that we can look at it and say, you know what, they've got the best interests of the church first at heart. And then they're also saying we will follow what the government says. But I must say this though, if there's anything that comes up in the law that is completely contrary to what the Bible says. So for example, I'll go right there. If the Marriage Act changes in this country that permits same-sex marriage, then the church has the right to say, even though that's the law of the land, we as a church have to stay with the laws that we have. And you know, it may cause all manner of trouble. We're seeing it happening across the world, but we've got to be able to say we have a greater law, a greater constitution that we're going to follow, even if the laws of the land will state something different and contrary to biblical laws.
All right. Bernice, how do you walk the line between religious freedom, as Joy has spoken about just now, and we are a community, right? Because there are those who would say, who are you? I am called. I hear directly from
Good.
the divine. So how did you walk that fine line?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a question that we tackled, you know, especially in the years that I was registrar, because I would have this discussion with pastors who came to my office to register, and I'd say, you know, everybody has a basic qualification, you know, whether it's a nursery school teacher, an entrepreneur who's trying to learn the business of making shoes or handbags, and they would say to me, I've been called, and God has called me. And then I would say, then you confirm that call by going to Bible school. And of course, they didn't always agree with me. So I think it's important, and the code does talk about capacity building. It's important that we encourage the men and women of God who are called to confirm that call by going to Bible school or just having some basic minimum. And as I've said, the code does talk about capacity building, and the code also envisages umbrella bodies. Reverend Jackie has mentioned the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, the NCCK. It also leaves it open to these churches. If Joy and I had a church, we can come under an umbrella body, or we can come together as charismatics and say, we want to have an umbrella body. So it really is targeting umbrella bodies that these churches will agree. And under that umbrella body, then when there are disputes or the congregation is unhappy, they can appeal to that umbrella body. And my church can appear before the umbrella body. And then this would also help the churches, because the Bible frowns on Christians taking each other to court. So before we go to court, we can go to the apex umbrella body, to the umbrella body that we subscribe to, and say, these are the issues. I could be a pastor and I've been expelled and I feel my rights have been violated. I can go to the umbrella body. It could be the congregation. So it really will be helpful. And I really like that it has scope for capacity building. You know, when I think about standard, and in a very simplistic way, if we have a recipe for a black forest or a fruit cake, and Jackie and Joy and I are running restaurants, people say this is not a black forest. So once you have a standard, everyone then aims for that standard. We can police ourselves, or our members would say, no, no, no. This is not a fruitcake. It doesn't even have any fruits. So that's the beauty with standards. It sets a standard, and all of us then want to have that standard. And we may not have it today, but we can aim to have that standard. So the code, I think, is such a good place to begin for all of us. And you know, in a real sense, the strong churches, the ones that have strong government, I think this is really good for them, because many have felt embarrassed. You open the Daily Nation, pastor did this, and you're thinking, pastor of which church? How do you define who's a pastor? So it even puts definition. So it's not only protecting existing churches or enhancing, but they can look and think, yeah, those charismatic churches have a code, and it has set a standard that runs across the board for all of us. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Joy, would this be used to cover up criminality? Because the several portions where you see disciplinary action, we're going through the table of contents with Reverend here. And then there's talk of ADR, alternative dispute resolution. And some of what Reverend Jackie says is contained in here is you define what is sexual harassment, for instance, how to manage tithe and all of that. But where there has been misappropriation of funds, where there has been sexual harassment, are these not criminal acts?
Indeed, they are. But if you in a situation where you're trying to promote self-governance and self-regulation, these are things that you must have prescribed in your code, as I'm sure it is for journalists, it is for lawyers.
Right.
It is even in our church situations right now. If you're going to work in the children's ministry, there's certain standards that you must do. So this is something that happens every day, because not all cases that are of deviation end up in the criminal justice system. There's some things that we will deal with and finish at that level. Maybe it was something that was preemptive. You notice that trajectory and you are able to deal with it. However, its existence in the code does not cancel or negate the penal code, because if you are caught in criminality, even now, with everything else, even if you're a Catholic priest and you've got strong governance in your institution, if you are caught in criminality, you will be given up to the jailer to do whatever he wants to do with you, because that's where the protection ends. And you had me talking earlier about enabling statutes. One of the things that we're also trying to push for, in order to give something like the Code of Conduct the force of law, it has to be anchored somewhere. And I think it's been put to the task force, and we're hoping that it comes to light, a religious freedom bill. Like I told you before, we had very elaborate protections and very strong deterrence under the previous constitution. But for some reason, when we were passing this constitution, one of the reasons the church said no was because Article 32 almost dealt with freedom of belief or of religion as just that. It did not look at belief, at conscience, at thought, at other things that were governed before. And so you can be in a religion, you can worship, and don't discriminate on the basis of religion, and it ends there. And so what we have is something that's really not fit for purpose. And then, like I said, the Societies Act, it has tried with, have this, have that, but it's all, it's a mishmash. It's trying to put things together. But if you have a dedicated religious freedom bill, you can say, look, this is how we are dealing with religious institutions. This is how we are dealing with now churches and mosques and temples and synagogues and everything. This is how we are dealing with institutions that are affiliated to them. Their schools, their hospitals, their youth centers, their whatnot. This is how we are going to deal with them. This is how we are going to deal with workers, the people who work in those institutions, whether it is exemptions from taxes, special visas, special what, all those things this is how tax exemption will happen for those. So something that is properly defined. Then what you can do is something like the code, for example. Like Bernice said, when you go to the religious, to registrar societies now and saying you want to register a church, she gives you like a model constitution, go take this one, and unda, make sure that you cover these topics in your... So something like the code, even if not adopted as the code as it exists right now, can form a basis of, these are the headlines in your code of conduct. We want to see the following topics. And it can have like the force of law in that sense. But as it exists right now, because of the way it just must be very voluntarily adopted, it depends on goodwill. And even when the goodwill fails, because we can summon you and tell you, my brother, this is the standard, and you can come and tell us it was the standard yesterday, today, I no longer recognize it as a standard, and you walk out. And there's actually nothing you can do. Anybody can do, except now falling back to the law of the land, to your question, the criminality, the basis of it. So we have to look at how can we make this robust? How can we help it stick? And like I said, not just for churches, we have to look at religion in its entirety. Because all these problems that we've had are not unique to the church. With our Muslim brothers and sisters, they're dealing with the issue of radicalization. That was part of why there was a moratorium on registering religious institutions. Because there are people who are coming up with mosques, importing teachers who are radicalizing children. And we saw a spike in terrorist activities. So the church was, the government was like, hold up, no new teachers or preachers or anybody until we find out what's going on. Since 2014, it was being lifted last year, and even still, it hasn't normalized anything. So we have to come to a place where we define the law properly, and we help also protect. Because Ms. Bernice said something, that if God has called you, it would be good for you to go to Bible school, to sharpen. But there are those, I mean, me, I'm Mrengo Kali of Shatate believers. I know there are those pastors who will not go to Bible school for nothing. God has called them. They were struck down by the power of the Holy Spirit. They were under the bed for 3 days, hearing from God. What Bible school is going to teach them anything? But now such a pastor also needs to have people around him who will help him to manage his call. And now those ones are the ones who, because the Bible tells us, make your election and calling sure. And in making your election and calling sure, it could be you going to get certified, or you having people around you who are certified. Because I know some very big bishops in the land who did not darken the door of anybody's class. But they were self-taught, self-schooled, and their calling has served nations. And actually, internationally, God has used them to mighty impact. But when you look around them, they do have the Joys and the Bernices and the Dr. Jackies who are there. You know, you've answered your call, you are reverend, but you have schooling. So there are those who will be like Bishop Oginde, who will be very highly trained, very highly skilled, and who will go to Bible school. Then the others will just come in the power of the Holy Ghost. But all of us have to find a space to be protected, such that even if it is not me who's doing this, can I have the house within which I can put the others? And that's why we're saying it's time for us to have a discussion about a religious freedom bill. Deal with the religious institutions separately. Why we are still under the Societies Act, I do not know. If even football clubs got to a place where they needed to have their own space, I do not know why religious institutions are still being treated this way. Because where we are right now, the prayers that are being prayed over Maria Goretti are so many, because people are saying she is victimizing us. And it's not her. It's the law within which she must operate as registrar of societies. So the time is ripe for this conversation. And not only that, time is also ripe for society to expect different from our leaders. Because I came from a generation where we were happy to take whatever the man of God said. It was the word of God. Thanks be to God. Our children are the type who question everything. So you tell us to lift up our hands to God. Why? I can't lift up my hands in my heart. Why should I physically lift them up? What are you trying to accomplish? We must go to church every Sunday. Why? So because we are even in a different generation, a different dispensation, for us to be able to bring the gospel effectively to this generation, we have to lift some of those veils, those curtains that we used to have in the church. They must be torn, and this is one of the way of tearing it. Having a transparent code, something expected, something that people can determine, some predictability in the process can also help the gospel to be received with more gladness. Because as Ms. Jackie said before, the days of you collecting the offering and putting it in the boot and going to count with your wife, those days are long gone. It is a collection for everybody to be used in the church. And let the pastor, like the code is suggesting, have a set remuneration. Pay your taxes. the good governance that also gives the church the credibility that helps it to do what God has called it to do in the society.
All right. I was about to say, preach. Well, we take a break, but when we come back on the other side, a couple of questions arose for me as Joy was speaking. Is this really about transparency ama kufunika aibu ya kanisa wazee waitwe tunasolve mambo internally, and also radicalization? You know, for many, given terrorist acts, terrorism in its previous definition, you know, we didn't think of it where the church is concerned. But now, given the events of Shakahola, we have seen that people can be or are being radicalized in churches. Does the code address that? On the other side of this break.
When you're finally released from pain, that moment when you start to get back to ordinary, and ordinary feels amazing. Whatever pain you're going through, release starts here.
Ndovu ni kuu.
Karibu Kenya, tuna tabia zetu tu. Wasiweka mkono juu. Yes you.
Ndovu kuu hapa ndani ya Kwetu Mix Show.
It's a girl Jewel.
It's your boy Arobo. Hey yo, jina langu ni Savara from Sauti Sol, and you're watching Kwetu Mix on NTV. Keep it locked, usibanduke.
Are you ready for a challenge that could change your life? Introducing #Nation Scholarship Challenge. We all know that getting an education can be tough, but we also know that a scholarship can make a huge difference. That's why Nation Media Group and Goodwill are giving you the chance to win 80,000 Kenya shillings. All you need to do is to post a video telling us why you want this scholarship and how it will help you achieve your goals. Don't forget to use the #Nation Scholarship in your post. It's super easy, and by taking part, you'll be part of a global community of people who are all working towards their goals. So if you're thinking about pursuing higher education or have big career aspirations, this is your chance to take a step forward. Don't wait too long. Complete your Goodwill profile and share your story with us now.
Nilinunua shamba na nilipanda mimea ya kuuza marikiti, lakini ukame ukanirudisha magotini.
To get Mariana, dial *811 *850#.
Skiza na Nation. Own your dream home for as low as 1.98 million Kenya shillings in Vipingo Kilifi. SMS Vipingo to 22365 or call us today on 0740 400 215. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, welcome back to AM Live. I was caught a little bit off guard there, Mike. No warning, but I was just looking at the team that was involved in this process, and I can see experts, for example, where audit, risk management, and accountability. I see the first name on the list here is actually Bernice Gashegu. And Bernice, I'll come to this. Was there like a public participation process to this? Ama mulika Nairobi, mahali kwa hall, and you prescribed, although Joy has told us it is not prescriptive, did you take the thoughts of that preacher in Busia somewhere who was preaching in the market with no tent even into account? But before then, there's a question that I raised just before the break, and Reverend Jackie, I would invite you to respond. The question of, is this about kufunika aibu ya kanisa, that tunakaa kama wazee tunazungumzia mambo yetu hapa? Yeah.
I think if that was the reason why we came up with the document, then I would say yes. But I don't believe so. Why? I think whenever we come up with something like this, we are brought to fore the minority. Shakahola was one. And there are hundreds of thousands of good pastors who are leading their flock, who are doing the right thing. But whenever an anomaly happens, whenever somebody does something wrong, that's what comes to the fore. So to say that we're doing this to cover up, I think would be erroneous, because that wasn't the intent. The intent was a request from the pastors themselves, the leaders themselves, saying, we are not equipped for this area. Look, most pastors are not lawyers. They're not risk management. They're not public secretaries. Many of us do come from other backgrounds, but majority really have heard the call early on, and they've spent their life training and preparing for their roles as pastors. So the expectation that they would know a lot of some of these things may be a bit high. So I believe that we will catch those who have come to try hide under the church, and they'll be exposed, especially if they sign on to this document. But I think we also must keep in mind that we will have those Kanyaris who will never sign this document. We'll have those people who come and say, I am not going under anybody's authority, because you're not going to look into my business, you're not going to check out my church. My word to people who go to that church is flee, because you don't know down the road what's going to happen. People must have gone into these churches that we're now looking at with serious scrutiny, knowing that these are solid, Bible-based, spirit-led churches when they walked in. By the time we're looking at the Jim Jones tragedy in Guyana, people started in that church knowing this was a solid church. But by the time they're drinking the poisoned Kool-Aid, people have been taken over completely. So we are looking and saying the vast majority actually want this. They're asking for the help. Hopefully it'll expose those ones who are trying to hide in churches and are trying to do their own thing, but we must have the reality. And I think we talked about the criminality of some of what people are doing. There will be the bad sort, the rotten egg, that gets into the church for their own purposes, to fleece people, to enrich themselves, which sometimes I wonder if that is really true. But anyway, it's I don't know, Joy, whether you'd say it's possible to be driving a Lamborghini from church offerings. It's not possible. And to be asking you, where else is your money coming from? Are you in business, or are you doing something else? So all I'm saying is this: there will be people who will need to be checked. And if they don't submit themselves to this document, there may not be too much. And I think now I'm finally understanding why Joy is always advocating that we need to have something in our constitution that talks about religions and religious societies, because it's free for all right now. It's open. Anyone can start something. You could be worshiping the goat next door. And I'm not talking about the greatest of all times.
She's talking goat.
The real goat.
Yeah. But also the question of, before I invite Bernice, the question of radicalization in churches. I mean, it's a difficult thing to police what you can and cannot preach, is it not?
Let me say, it's difficult to police someone's beliefs. I think that's what's difficult.
Okay.
What goes on in someone's heart and spirit, it's very hard to police that, because that is a very personal relationship between you and your God. There are people who can take advantage of that. They take advantage of people's desire to serve God, people's desire to walk right. And they come in, and most radicalization does not happen straight up. You come in and you begin by changing people's thinking, by introducing, one doctrine that's just slightly off, not quite, off base, but it sounds a lot like what you already know. So you take that on board. But as someone has once said, if you start at point A and you're trying to get to point B, but you're 1 degree off, by the time you are at the same line as point B, you're completely in a different direction. So it just takes one small thing that someone just keeps teaching their people, and before you know it, someone has become radicalized. But I do also, Joy, you've taught me something today, that literally the Christian faith, let me talk about the Christian faith. The Christian faith is a radical faith. It requires some form of radicalization, because if you're to follow the precepts of Jesus Christ, there are many things that he tells us to do that society is fine. So for example, it tells you if somebody strikes you, turn the other cheek. If somebody wants a coat from you, give them two. That means you stay without and you give somebody else. That is a radical way of thinking. It tells us about adultery. It's not about sleeping with someone, but even thinking lustful thoughts. You've already committed adultery. Getting angry with someone, you've already committed murder. These are radical ways of seeing, faith and life. So there is an element of radicalization that happens when someone says, I'm not going to walk and live my life in a way that's been prescribed by society, but I'm going to live a life the way that's prescribed by the Bible. And often it's contrary to what society does say. If we're to look at the modern society and where we're going as the world, there's a lot that is permissible in the world that for a Christian, they say it's not permissible. This is not what we've been taught. And so I'm seeing, I think I saw an article on the press. Some lady's been taken to court in the US because she's refused to do websites for people who are getting married in same-sex marriages. And that's her own personal choice based on her beliefs. But right now she's facing the court system. We've heard of the stories of people who, won't bake cakes for weddings that are, again, same-sex. And they're getting, demonized. But yet that's their own personal journey and understanding. And the state wants to put its own spin on you and make it seem as if you're the one who is criminally wrong to have a stand. And my prayer is that doesn't get to us as Kenyans, and we're trusting our legal fraternity to help us with the laws that will protect the church in many ways, protect the faith-based groups in many ways, so that we don't get caught up where now we're the ones who are looking for the help because we are being squeezed into a small corner and told, thus far and no more. Okay. That's the big fear in the church.
Okay, so how do you draw the line then, right? Because as you see, you've learned something from Joy today, that the faith itself is radical. But then, so where do you draw the line between what you're teaching is just radical enough, and then and this is now dangerous?
Right. My only word is the standard of the Bible. If I stay with Scripture as a believer, as a pastor, as a leader of church, as I said, I'm head of education in our church. If everything that we're doing in the education front has a foundation that's biblical, and we're staying to the precepts of what we've been taught by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, it puts us on a very sure foundation. It puts us on a solid rock. Have people used that to become radical? Yes, they have. But it's the only standard that we have. That's the one thing that we can stand on and say, if we want to build something that is good, that is pure, that is virtuous, that is honest, then we must build it on the word of Jesus Christ, the word that's in our scriptures. Anything that we build outside of that then will get tainted with self, will get tainted with my own ideas and thinking, will get tainted with what the world is pushing my direction as acceptable in the 21st century. But if I stay with the word, that's all I have. That's all I have as a pastor, is the word.
I know, I must say.
But I must add, like I said before, what we had in our previous constitution. Let me read for you that subsection 5 of section 78 of the repealed constitution. Nothing contained in or done under the authority of any law shall be held to be inconsistent with the law, as long as there's the provisions that, let me just jump to where the religious liberty was curtailed. In the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, and public health, and for the purposes of protecting the rights and freedoms of other persons to observe their own religious beliefs. So there is a space within which you can exercise your religious freedom, but where the state draws the line is life, limb, and liberty. If what you're exercising, as radicalized as you are, affects the life, limb, and liberty of anybody else, then that's where they draw the line. That's why they talk about defense. This is a national issue, which is now where terrorism falls in. If you're using religion to undermine the defense, the internal defense of the country and the homeland security, then your religious freedom cover is blown. Public safety, public order, public morality, public health, shakahola. As in, once you cross that line, that's where your religious freedom ends and the government steps in. Because for most of us, as radical as we are about our faith, it doesn't endanger the life, limb, and liberty of anybody else. So if I today choose, for example, and say, let's say I'm a person of the SDA faith, and I am in a situation where I need a blood transfusion, but I say my faith says I cannot take blood transfusion, and I'm ready to die without a blood transfusion. The law should protect my right to believe in that and let me be. But if I go, like for example, you have seen this before, where now it's a child in need of this is somebody else. Then your ward, but it is somebody else. So you'll find the state saying, no, now here we are protecting the child. You believe what you want, but here we are protecting the child. And so we are drawing a line. If the child grows up to choose what you believe when they're over 18, then again, we leave you to your own devices, because the law is not designed to protect you from, you know, if you believe in something that is where you're being gullible, because the standard that is used in the law is called the reasonable man. Is the man riding a bus to Kawangware. If that man riding a bus to Kawangware thinks this is common sense for him, this is what he believes, that if he wears a certain hat, if he wears a certain outfit, it makes him a more holy person. He needs to have that comfort, because everybody needs something in this life to help them get along. Some of us pay a shrink, some of us go to church, some of us drink a little. All of us depend on something, and that should be protected in the law. But in that protection, it may not make sense the rest of us, but you should be able to have that freedom. But as the man of God or the woman of God, if you intentionally want to turn people away from what is good for them into something that is error, and now you're affecting their quality of life, then that becomes a problem. Because when people tell me, oh, we want to protect people from, they're taking a lot of money. And I'm like, look, betting takes a lot of money from people. EABL is one of the most profitable companies in Kenya, and they take a lot of money from people who can barely afford it sometimes. BAT, or is it still BAT? I don't know. The people who still smoke daily. And you know what? We keep telling them, it will kill you, but they're like, we're happy, we will die happy. The freedom of belief and thought and conscience is wide, because all of us just need to have that space where this is me, this is what I've chosen, live with it. But in that protection also, we have to be careful that you're not spilling over into other people's, making the quality of life small, which is what we're talking about during the break with Shakahola. The moment it became, now you're not worshipping, now you're starving to death. Somebody tries to get away and there's blunt force trauma to force you to starve to death. Then the line has been crossed. So even as Reverend Jackie is saying, the Bible is a standard. But you know, the government has also got a standard. And if the government steps in to where is religiously protected space, then we have to have rules of engagement. So that when the government is coming in, at what point do they come in? So like, for example, if I'm a believer and I don't want to bake the cake for the same-sex couple, should the government come and tell me, no, you bake cakes, so you bake cakes for everybody? Is that a reasonable expectation? Because I'm not the only baker in the land. Probably not, because something else could happen. But if I was a doctor and this person is dying, and I'm like, I cannot touch them because they engage, then in that situation, can you still claim religious? So this has to be nuanced, and the conversation has to be had. And if we don't learn from what is happening in other jurisdictions and how the space of religion has been whittled down because of societal norms, because, you know, when I look at, for example, some of the persecution happening with the people in the West, it looks ridiculous that they're being persecuted for not baking cakes for same-sex. It looks very ridiculous. But if you don't learn from history, or if you don't learn from what's happening now, eventually it's going to come here. So let's have the conversation early. Let's put the parameters early. Let's put protection early, because there's room enough for everybody. The Bible tells us that God creates for all he has made. All of us have space on this earth with all our diverse views and thoughts, and all of us can coexist. It is possible. And we are hoping something like the Code of Conduct will help, especially those who choose to be in religious institutions, to have something that will help them live there without too much drama. But if you follow a pastor, like Jackie says, if you follow a pastor who chooses not to, caveat
Says
emptor.
flee.
No, it is caveat emptor. You go there knowing full well and following a rogue. Now, as the young people say, kiki kuramba, usituambie, because you knew very well your pastor is self-styled. So even you be styled by him.
Okay. But Bernice, you know, that preacher, and I use the example of Busia, and he is spreading the gospel in the marketplace there. You know, dusty shoes out in the sun. He just has his speaker. You know, can he claim ownership of this document in terms of this is our document? You know, because or is this nyinyi watu wa Nairobi na vitu kwa ground ni different? Mulika huko Nairobi mukajiandikia, hamwelewi kunaendelea aje huku kwa ground.
It's a very good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, let me first say, first of all, we didn't sit in Nairobi. In fact, I remember we had a retreat in Naivasha. And like I earlier said, we had certified secretaries, we had auditors, like in the audit committee, who were saying, this is what in the corporate world, there's always an auditor. You have an annual general meeting, you present your accounts, and that's part of the corporate world. And remember, we're saying that if you're a church, then Jesus said you're the salt and light. You really ought to be the example. You can't be the one who has never audited your accounts and things like that. So we sat in various places and we had different professionals, including the church and pastors. The other thing we've done is this document has been validated several times. There was a draft 1, there was a draft 2. I have even sat in a group where there were Pentecostals and evangelistic churches, and they were just being taken through. So there's been several validation meetings with different groups. And so that pastor in Busia, in the dust, with just a microphone, this is for him. And if you look at it, and I know that you went through the context, really it's for corporate governance, that we have standards of integrity, we have standards for stewardship, we have standards for dispute resolution. You talked about, are we protecting people from criminality or the penal code? Do you know, even in the courts now, alternative dispute resolution, there's court mediation where the courts are saying, first go to mediation, just to reduce the load for the courts. So it's really an excellent standard, even for the Busia preacher, and it gives him like a basic minimum, you know. And really, there's been a lot of validation with different groups and even allowing input. And that's why there was a draft 1, there was a draft 2, and this is the final draft. Just engaging different sectors of society and having an input. Yeah.
And I think it was actually drafted with the Busia pastor in mind.
Yeah.
Because for some of the bigger churches, they have the auditors in the churches, they have the lawyers. I mean, I think like my church, Deliverance Church, if we needed to come up with a document like this, Bishop Mark just needs to make one announcement. He'll have a room full of 300 people ready to come up with something like this in a heartbeat. Others have had this for years. But there's this pastor who his resources are just from here to his flock. There's not much by way of even the expertise or even where he's ministering. Maybe you have a church in an informal sector. So even the people in your congregation don't have the expertise that you need for this. Now, this having been done on a voluntary basis by the professionals is also available. Freely we've received, freely we have given. It's available for you to use and adopt and have gold standard qualifications in whatever setting you have. Because it's not for sale. It's not for profit. Hesabika is a not-for-profit institution. Those of us who participated in this did not charge Hesabika for our time. We've done it on a voluntary basis. And those who choose to sign up and adopt it, do so freely at no cost to them. It was designed for that pastor in mind, who wants to do right, who wants to set up the right structures, but doesn't have the technical know-how to know where to start. Here you've got a guy that can help you do things right from the beginning. Because like I said, most of them start on the Aga Khan walk or somewhere. But as the church grows, you really don't know what to do with it. So you get caught up in this thing and you don't know where to go next. You don't know how to manage the accounts. Now there's so many laws to think about. There's the finances to think about. There's data protection, as Jackie mentioned earlier. You may just be thinking, pan the camera around, people being delivered, kicking their legs in the air. Next thing you know, it's a lawsuit. This helps you to understand these things are minefields. The thing about getting elders on board, accountability. It helps you think about the things you didn't think about. So it was actually drafted for that, with that pastor specifically in mind. And as Ms. Bernice has said, it was actually also peer reviewed, because the first draft that we did was done by professionals. When we took it to the pastors, the feedback that came back was quite brutal. They were they tore it apart limb from limb. And I must give credit to Dr. Joshua for sticking with it. Because as we've refined it, we've responded to it. And now, as per the last few weeks when we've been doing the final validation, you have a lot more acceptance of what has gone in and saying, you know what, yeah, this we can work with. And like we said, it is scaffolding. It is, you can build on it. Some things that you're not ready for, you just have the one congregation. You can't even afford to audit. What is that to be an audit? Maybe the takings are so kidogo. You can come together, 3 or 4 churches, hire one auditor, let him just do a job around all of you. The suggestions are many on how we can improve the experience of the growing church to merge with the experience of the bigger churches, because the more established churches, the thinking was done for them. Yeah. So if today you are in a presbytery, you don't have to think about how to run it. That's right. Everything has been done for you. You just fit in. But if I go and start a ministry, God has called me and I go to Masterbit and I start a ministry, there's a place where like the TD says, God has hidden the chair in the tree. There are places where you have to go, cut down the tree and start carving the furniture for yourself. This is what will help the pastors carve the furniture to give them the good governance principles that will help them do the gospel better. So that's what we hope it will do, even for the pastor who's a salon congregation. But you can see God is taking you far. Start right.
All right, start right. I'll invite you to make your final remarks. Actually, time has flown. I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, wait. It's already 7:50. But ahead of tomorrow's launch, what's the thing you would like to leave the shepherds with, the message, you know? What would you exhort them to do with regard to this code of conduct and governance guidelines? Where can they find it, you know, interact with it before making a decision one way or the other?
Okay. Let me use an analogy. I come from a fishing community. So we're fishermen. We know about the water. We know about the fish. We know what time of the day. You go fishing. You don't fish in the middle of the day. You fish at night. And, you know, whatever tools you need to go out and fish, that's what we do. But now I have to be a shepherd. I don't know much about sheep. I don't know how to take care of sheep. I don't know that sheep bite. I don't know what kind of flies get into the sheep's nostrils and make it a mess. I've got to learn a whole new different set of things to be able to change from being a fisherman to a shepherd. And this is what I think this document will do for many people. It'll put in their hands tools to become better shepherds. You know, as I said before, we are trained theologically. And maybe just to speak into that whole issue about the training, you know, that every pastor must be theologically trained. It's not an easy thing to state and say, but it can be done, you know, different ways. You don't have to go to a degreed program to learn how to, you know, your theology. There are many ways in which it can be done. Many Bible schools that are really good out there that can help you know what you need. So that's one way. The other way is this one, where you can get now what you need for governance, how to set up a board. You know, what kind of board are you setting up? What kind of church polity are you going with? You know, are you a congregational church? Are you bishop-led? You know, and it just gives you all those details that will say, okay, this is what resonates with what I believe I've been called to do. So now I know I need a shepherd's staff. You know, I need to be able to take my sheep to where there's water, where there's green grass, but you're given the tools to be able to do that. And at the end of the day, you look at your congregation and you say, who I've been entrusted with, I have done the best. I can't buy them. And that they're growing, they're healthy, they're becoming citizens of not just the kingdom, but of whatever nation, city where we've placed them. And then you're saying we're raising up a generation that is of value to the world that we live in. So it's a tool. That's what I'll keep saying. It's a tool that's been given to us. I think it's a great tool. More people should have a look at it. I'm sure they'll tell us where we can get all the way beyond tomorrow. But it's something that let's leverage on what they have done over the past number of years to give us this document. And let's not wait for the government to come and shut us down. Let's regulate from in the internal side going out.
All right. Bernice, what message would you like to leave us with?
Well, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for the church. It provides a win-win in the sense that church is saying to government, we are ready to self-regulate. And it's a wonderful opportunity where the church for the first time have come together and said, yes, we're putting a standard, and it protects the congregation, it protects employees of the church, it protects the church itself. So my parting shot is it's a wonderful opportunity for the church. It's a win-win for everyone, the congregation, the pastors, the employees in churches. And even in the argument with government that church wants to self-regulate, the church can say, yes, here we're demonstrating. And especially for the umbrella bodies, and it's a way where we can encourage that lone church in Busia to join an umbrella body and be accountable. It's an opportunity for church to be accountable and to say, yes, we are ready to be accountable to our membership and to the society. Thank you.
All right. Joy?
With me, my call will be to the government. We have, as the religious institutions, tried from the days of Professor Gidhu with the infamous associations bill to this date to try to get the government to listen and give religious societies room and freedom to operate and to give us the legal framework within which to operate safely. We have kicked this can down the road long enough. It's time to bite the bullet and do something about it. The task force is a good place to start, and I'm hoping the task force will be bold enough to come up with proposals for constitutional amendment as well as legal proposals that will put the religious, it's not just the church, religious institutions and religious organizations on a footing where they can practice their religion freely, but also for the benefit of society. So my call would be to the government. Time has come for us to have this conversation and to finally stick the landing, because we've been somersaulting for long. It is time to just do the final flip and stick the landing.
Do the final flip and stick the landing. Good note on which to end. And I want to just make special mention of Dr. Joshua Wadhanga. He's the chair, Hesabika Trust, and he was instrumental in making this conversation possible. You know, during the Shakahola, you know, when the news broke and we're discussing regulation of churches, I had a lot of manuals, and I kept being asked, are there no female church leaders? So, to have professional and reverend here, it's a brilliant thing. Thank you very much for being here this morning. I also wanted to make it known, as I've mentioned previously, this document for the conversation to continue, because we've just started it essentially. The launch of the Code of Conduct and Governance Guidelines for the Church in Kenya will be happening.
Another manual.
It will be happening tomorrow, moderated by my boss here, Joe Ageo. I see there will be Apostle Isaac Wangi, Senior Counsel Charles Kanjaba, Reverend Dr. David Oginde, the Most Reverend Dr. Jackson Ole Sapit at the All Saints Cathedral between 9 a.m. and noon. So if you have questions, you know, you could pop in, listen, and get a better sense.
Allow me to also just plug in this press today concerning this. At the Holy Family Basilica, we'll be saying Mass between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. So even if you cannot attend, let us pray towards helping the religious institutions come to a good conclusion in this matter. So Mass today, Holy Family, 10 to 12.
All right, Mass today, Holy Family Basilica, 10 to 12. There you have it. And this is what we're discussing this morning, the church and its cross. Time for the whip in the temple is a question, standardizing best practice in church governance. And with me in a studio this morning, we've had Reverend Jacqueline Othoro, Head of Education, RAC Assembly. We've also had Bernice Gashegu, former Registrar General, Office of the Attorney General, and Joyim Divo, Executive Director, East Africa Center for Law and Justice. Once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us on AM Live. Coming up is Winnie Lubembe with Your World.